The starship Taeyang's dawn moved through the empty darkness of space like a metal fish swimming through an endless black ocean. Dr. Han-Sol Kim pressed his face against the viewing window and watched the dead solar system grow larger in front of them. 3 planets circled a dying red star, but none of them showed any signs of life. Han-Sol had been studying dead worlds for 15 years now. He was a xenoarchaeologist, which meant he looked for traces of alien life that had lived and died long ago. Most of the time he found nothing but rocks and dust. Sometimes he found fossils of simple creatures. But today felt different somehow. "We are approaching the second planet now," said Captain Jae-min-yoon from the bridge. His voice came through the speakers in the research lab where Han-Sol worked. "All scans show the planet is completely dead. No atmosphere, no water, nothing." Lieutenant Yoon-B Park walked into the lab carrying a cup of hot coffee. She was the military officer assigned to protect the research team, though Han-Sol could not imagine what dangers they might face on a dead rock floating in space. She was young and had bright eyes that always seemed to be looking for trouble. "Another empty world," she said, sitting down next to Han-Sol. "Why do we keep visiting these dead places? We never find anything interesting." Han-Sol smiled at her. "Every dead world tells a story. We just have to learn how to read it." The ship shook slightly as they entered orbit around the planet. Through the window, Han-Sol could see a world of gray stone and deep canyons. No clouds moved across its surface. No green plants grew anywhere. It looked like it had been dead for millions of years. "Beginning surface scans now," announced Chief Engineer So-Young Choi from the engine room. She was the smartest person on the ship when it came to making machines work. Her scanners could find the tiniest trace of anything unusual on a planet's surface. Han-Sol put on his headphones and listened to the data coming in from the scanners. Most of it was exactly what he expected. Rock. More rock, ancient lava flows, empty craters where meteors had hit the planet long ago. Then something made him sit up straight. "Wait," he said, adjusting the scanner controls. "So-Young, can you focus the deep scan on grid section 774? "Scanning now," came her voice through the headphones. The data that came back made Han-Sol's heart beat faster. Buried deep under layers of rock and dust, the scanners had found something that should not exist. Organized structures, things that had been made by intelligent creatures. "Captain," Han-Sol called out, his voice shaking with excitement. "We need to land on this planet, right now." Captain Yoon's voice came back through the speakers. "What did you find down there, Han-Sol?" "I think we found ruins, very old ruins." Lieutenant Yoon-B Park leaned over to look at Han-Sol's scanner display. "How old are we talking about?" Han-Sol checked the readings 3 times before he answered. "At least 4 million years old, maybe more." The ship went quiet for a moment. Everyone knew that intelligent life in the galaxy was supposed to be much younger than that. The oldest known civilization was only about 50,000 years old. 4 million years was impossible. "Are you certain about those readings?" asked Captain Yoon. "The scanners do not lie," said So-Young Choi. "There are definitely artificial structures down there, and they are very, very old." 2 hours later, the landing team stood on the surface of the dead planet. Han-Sol wore a heavy spacesuit because the planet had no air to breathe. Lieutenant Park carried a plasma rifle, even though there was clearly nothing alive to shoot. Engineer Choi brought her portable excavation tools. The ruins were buried 20 meters below the surface. It took them 6 hours of careful digging to reach the first artifacts. When Han-Sol brushed the dust away from the first object, he could not believe what he was seeing. It was made of ivory, pure white ivory that seemed to glow with its own inner light. But this was not the ivory of any animal Han-Sol had ever seen. This ivory had been carved into complex shapes and patterns. Strange symbols covered every surface. "This is impossible," whispered Lieutenant Park through her helmet radio. "Ivory cannot survive for 4 million years. It should have turned to dust long ago. But there it was, perfect and gleaming in their lights. As they dug deeper, they found more pieces, tablets covered with writing, tools and weapons carved from the same glowing ivory, small statues of creatures that looked nothing like any known species. The most amazing discovery was a large tablet that stood upright like a monument. It was covered with thousands of symbols arranged in neat rows. The ivory seemed to pulse with a soft light that made the symbols easier to read. "So young," said Hansol. "Can you bring the translation computer down here?" "Already on it," she replied, carrying the portable AI unit toward the monument. The translation computer was the most advanced piece of technology on their ship. It could analyze unknown languages and find patterns that human minds might miss. When So Young connected it to the ivory tablet, the screen immediately began showing results. "It is definitely a language," she said, watching the data scroll past. "A very complex one. The computer says it will take several hours to build a basic translation matrix." As they worked through the day, more amazing discoveries emerged from the dig site. They found ivory weapons that were clearly designed for fighting, long spears with carved handles, sword-like blades that curved in elegant arcs, small throwing weapons that fit perfectly in a humanoid hand. But the strangest thing was how all the ivory seemed to be connected somehow. When Hansol touched one piece, the others nearby would glow a little brighter. When Lieutenant Park picked up one of the weapons, symbols on the nearby tablets would pulse with light. "It is like they are all part of one big system," said So Young, running her scanner over the artifacts. "The ivory is not just carved bone. It has some kind of energy running through it." As the sun set over the dead planet, the translation computer finally finished its analysis of the monument. The results appeared on the screen in simple galactic standard language. "Warning to those who come after," Hansol read aloud. "We were the first. We were not the last. The Devourers return every 4,600,000 years. They consume all organic life. We learned to fight them with weapons carved from our own bodies. Our ivory holds our memories, our strength, our final hope." The three team members stood in silence, staring at the glowing words on the screen. Somewhere in the darkness above them, their ship waited to carry them back to civilization. But first they had to understand what they had found. 4,600,000 years. Hansol did the math in his head. If the cycle was real, if the Devourers really returned every 4 million years, then the next visit was overdue. "We need to take everything back to the ship," he said finally. "Every piece of ivory, every tablet, everything." "Why the hurry?" asked Lieutenant Park. Hansol looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the alien sky. "Because I think we just found a warning that we are already too late." As they loaded the ivory artifacts into transport cases, each piece continued to glow with that strange inner light. The symbols seemed to dance and shift when no one was looking directly at them. And deep in his mind, Hansol began to hear something that might have been voices from the distant past. The Devourers were coming, and humanity had no idea how to fight them. Chief linguist Minho Lee had not slept for 36 hours. He sat hunched over his workstation in the research lab, his eyes red and tired from staring at thousands of glowing symbols. Empty coffee cups surrounded his desk like small towers. The ivory tablets lay spread out before him, each one pulsing with that strange inner light. "You need to rest," said Dr. Hansol Kim, placing a hand on Minho's shoulder. "The tablets will still be here when you wake up." Minho shook his head without looking up from his work. "I am so close to understanding them. The patterns are starting to make sense. These symbols, they are not just writing. They are something much more complex." Lieutenant Yunbi Park walked into the lab carrying a plate of food. She set it down next to Minho's computer. "At least eat something. You cannot translate dead languages if you starve yourself." The ivory tablets seemed to respond to their voices. The symbols grew brighter for a moment, then settled back to their usual soft glow. Minho had noticed this happening more often lately. The artifacts were somehow aware of what was happening around them. "Look at this," Minho said, pointing to a section of text on the largest tablet. "The computer has been translating individual words, but I think it has been doing it wrong. These are not separate words at all. They are layers of meaning built on top of each other." Engineer So-Young Choi looked up from her own workstation, where she had been studying the physical properties of the ivory. "What do you mean by layers?" "Each symbol contains multiple pieces of information," Minho explained, his voice getting excited. "There is the basic meaning, like we would write in our language, but there are also emotional components, memory fragments, and something else I cannot identify yet." Han-Sol leaned closer to look at the screen. "Show me what you have translated so far." Minho pulled up his latest work on the main display. Lines of text appeared in Galactic Standard Language, but they were incomplete and full of gaps where the translation program could not find matching words. "We were called the ancestors by those who came after us," Minho read aloud. "Our world was green and full of life when the Devourers first came from the empty spaces between stars. They came in ships of metal and hunger. They consumed everything living, plants, animals, even the bacteria in our soil." The room fell silent as Minho continued reading. "We tried to fight them with our normal weapons. Energy beams, explosive missiles, plasma cannons. Nothing worked. The Devourers absorbed our attacks and grew stronger. They began converting our world into fuel for their machines." Lieutenant Park sat down heavily in a chair. "How did they survive?" "The message said they learned to fight back." "That is where it gets interesting," said Minho, scrolling to the next section. "Listen to this part. We discovered that the Devourers could not process one type of matter. The living bone of our bodies contained something they could not absorb or convert. Our ivory was poison to them." So-Young looked up from her scanner readings. "That matches what I am finding here. This ivory is not normal bone material. It has a completely different molecular structure. There are energy pathways running through it like a circuit board." Minho nodded and continued reading. "The first warrior to discover this was named Tal-een. She was dying from wounds received in battle with the Devourers. In her pain and rage, she broke off one of her own tusks and drove it into the nearest Devourer machine. The machine died instantly." "They had tusks?" asked Han-Sol. "The ancestors were not like us," Minho replied. "From what I can translate, they had bony protrusions all over their bodies, natural armor and weapons that grew from their skeletons. When they discovered these could harm the Devourers, they began reshaping them into proper weapons." The linguist pulled up another section of translation. "But the process was extremely painful. To create a weapon, an ancestor had to break off part of their own skeleton and reshape it while the bone was still living. Dead bone lost its power to harm the Devourers." Lieutenant Park winced. "They had to mutilate themselves to make weapons." "It was worse than that," said Minho quietly. "The ivory weapons needed to be fed with the wielder's life energy to remain effective. Each time they used a weapon in battle, it drained years from their lifespan. They were literally burning their lives away to fight the Devourers." Captain Jae-min Yoon's voice came through the communication system. "Minho, can you come to the bridge? We are receiving some strange signals from the outer sensor array." The linguist reluctantly left his work and followed the others to the bridge. Captain Yoon stood at the main display, his face grim. The screen showed a map of the local star systems with dozens of red warning indicators scattered across it. "What are we looking at?" asked Han-Sol. "Ancient automated platforms," replied Captain Yoon. "They have been dormant for millions of years, but in the last 6 hours, 37 of them have suddenly activated. They are beginning to move toward inhabited systems." Navigator Bo-Ram Shin looked up from her console. "Sir, I am detecting similar activation patterns across the entire galaxy. Whatever is waking these platforms up, it is happening everywhere at once." Lieutenant Park felt a chill run down her spine. The cycle. The devourers are coming back. Minho rushed back to his translation work with new urgency. If the devourers were really returning, they needed to understand everything the ancestors had learned about fighting them. He pulled up the next section of the ivory tablets and began reading faster than ever before. The war lasted for 300 years, he translated aloud for the others who had followed him back to the lab. We learned to create weapons that could channel our life force into destructive energy, spears that could pierce devourer armor, blades that could cut through their strongest materials, but the cost was terrible. So-young had been taking detailed scans of every ivory artifact. Minho, look at this. The weapons are not just carved bone. They have internal structures that I have never seen before, chambers and channels that look designed to carry some kind of energy. The ancestors called it soul fire, Minho read from the tablets. The energy that flows through all living things. They learned to concentrate this energy and direct it through their ivory weapons. A skilled warrior could destroy an entire devourer ship with a single strike. But at what cost? Asked Hansol. Minho found the answer in the next passage. Each use of soul fire shortened the warrior's life. A battle that might last one day could cost 10 years of life. The greatest warriors died young, but saved their people from extinction. Communications officer Eugene Nam's voice came through the speakers with obvious fear. Captain, you need to see this. Long-range sensors are detecting massive structures approaching from outside the galaxy. They are huge, bigger than anything we have ever seen. Captain Yoon's voice was steady but tense. How long until they reach the nearest inhabited systems? At their current speed, approximately 4 months, Eugene replied. The research team looked at each other in growing panic. 4 months to figure out how to fight an enemy that had destroyed civilizations for millions of years. 4 months to learn how to use weapons that required them to sacrifice their own lives. Minho turned back to the ivory tablets with desperate determination. There has to be more. The ancestors survived somehow. They found a way to break the cycle. As if responding to his words, the largest tablet began to glow brighter than ever before. New symbols appeared on its surface, symbols that had not been visible before. The translation computer immediately began working on the new text. "What does it say?" asked Lieutenant Park. Dr. Hansol Kim stood alone in the research lab at 3 in the morning. The ship was quiet, except for the soft humming of the engines. Everyone else was asleep. But Hansol could not stop thinking about the ivory tablets. They seemed to call to him in a way he could not explain. The largest tablet sat on the examination table, glowing with its usual soft light. The symbols on its surface seemed to shift and dance when he was not looking directly at them. Minho had warned everyone not to touch the artifacts directly, but Hansol felt drawn to them like a moth to a flame. He reached out slowly and placed his palm flat against the warm ivory surface. The world exploded into light and sound and memory. Suddenly, Hansol was standing on a different planet under a purple sky. 2 suns burned overhead, casting strange shadows across a landscape of crystal trees and silver grass. But the beauty of this world was being destroyed before his eyes. Massive black machines moved across the horizon like metal mountains. They had no specific shape, but seemed to flow and change as they consumed everything in their path. The crystal trees withered and died as the machines passed. The silver grass turned to ash. Even the soil itself was being drained of life. Hansol tried to move but found he was seeing through someone else's eyes. He was experiencing the memories stored in the ivory tablet. The memories of an ancestor warrior named Tal-een. Tal-een ran through the dying forest, her heavy footsteps crushing the brittle remains of plants. She was not human. Her body was covered in natural bone armor that grew from her skeleton. Long tusks curved from her jaw, spines protruded from her arms and back. She was a creature built for war. Behind her, other ancestors fled from the advancing devourers, men, women, and children all running for their lives. Their bone armor clattered as they moved. Their tusks gleamed in the light of the dying suns. "The weapons do nothing!" shouted another warrior named Morvash as he caught up to Tal-een. "Our plasma cannons, our missile launchers, our energy shields, the devourers absorb everything and grow stronger." Tal-een stopped running and turned to face the approaching machines. "Then we will find another way to fight them. We must." Hansol watched through Tal-een's eyes as she grabbed one of her own tusks and began to twist it. The pain was incredible, but she continued until the tusk broke free from her jaw. Blood ran down her face, but she ignored it. The broken tusk began to glow with the same light that now filled the ivory tablets. Tal-een held it like a spear and charged toward the nearest devourer machine. When the glowing tusk touched the black metal, the machine screamed. It was a sound no machine should be able to make, a cry of pain and fear. The devourer began to dissolve where the ivory touched it, its dark metal turning to dust. "It works!" Tal-een shouted to the other warriors. "Our bone can hurt them. Our living ivory is poison to their kind." But using the weapon had cost her. Hansol could feel through the memory how the attack had drained years from Tal-een's life. Her hair had turned gray in the span of seconds. Lines appeared around her eyes. The price of victory was aging and death. More ancestors began breaking off pieces of their own bone armor to create weapons. Each transformation was agony, but they endured it. Soon, dozens of glowing ivory weapons lit up the battlefield as the ancestors fought back against their destroyers. The memory shifted, showing Hansol scenes from the Great War that followed. He saw ancestor cities with walls made of living bone. He watched warriors training with ivory weapons that could channel their life energy into beams of destructive light. He experienced battles where a single ancestor could destroy an entire devourer ship, but at the cost of decades of their lifespan. The most powerful weapons required the greatest sacrifice. The ivory tablets themselves had been created by ancestors who gave up their entire lives to encode their memories and knowledge into the glowing bone. They had become one with their weapons, their consciousness preserved forever in the ivory. Hansol saw the final battle of the war. The last devourer fleet hung in space above the ancestor homeworld. The planet's surface was scarred and broken, its crystal forests long dead. Only a few thousand ancestors remained alive. Their greatest warrior, an ancient female named Keth-Ava, stood before the ivory tablets they had created. She was hundreds of years old, but looked like a young person because she had never used her life energy in battle. She had been saving it for this moment. "I will become the final weapon," she said to her people. "I will transform my entire body into living ivory and use all of my life force at once. It will destroy the devourers forever, but I will not survive." The other ancestors protested, but Keth-Ava had already begun the transformation. Her bone armor spread across her skin like growing crystal. Her flesh became ivory. Her blood became liquid light. She was becoming something that was no longer entirely alive, but was not quite dead either. When the transformation was complete, Keth-Ava raised her arms toward the devourer fleet. Light poured from her body like water from a broken dam. The energy struck the enemy ships and they simply vanished, dissolved by the pure life force of an entire world concentrated into a single attack. But the cost was everything. Keth-Ava crumbled to dust, her life completely spent. The remaining ancestors fell to their knees, knowing they had won but at a price that could never be repaid. The memory began to fade, and Hansol found himself back in the research lab. He was lying on the floor next to the examination table. His hand was still touching the ivory tablet, but now the tablet was glowing brighter than ever before. Lieutenant Yunbi Park burst into the lab with her weapon drawn. "Hansol, what happened? The sensors detected a massive energy surge from this room." Hansol slowly sat up, his head spinning from the visions. I saw them. The ancestors. I experienced their memories. I know how they defeated the Devourers. Captain Jamin Yoon's voice came through the communication system, urgent and frightened. All hands to battle stations. Long-range sensors are detecting Devourer scout ships entering our system. They are moving fast and heading straight for us. Lieutenant Park helped Han Sol to his feet. How many ships? 12 confirmed, came the captain's reply. They will be here in 6 hours. Han Sol looked at the glowing ivory weapons scattered around the lab. Now he understood what they really were. They were not just tools or artifacts. They were the preserved souls of warriors who had given everything to protect their people. We need to wake up the others, he said to Lieutenant Park. And we need to make a choice that no one should ever have to make. What kind of choice? Han Sol picked up one of the smaller ivory weapons, feeling its warm surface pulse with stored life energy. We need to decide who among us is willing to break their own bones and turn them into weapons, who is ready to sacrifice years of their life to fight monsters from beyond the stars. The ivory weapon grew brighter in his hands, as if responding to his words. Outside the ship, Devourer scouts moved through the darkness like sharks sensing blood in the water. The ancient enemy had returned, and humanity had only hours to learn how to fight them. The time for memories was over. The time for sacrifice had begun. The crew of the Taiyang's Dawn gathered in the main conference room. 12 faces looked at Dr. Han Sol Kim as he explained what he had learned from the ivory tablets. The room was dimly lit, but the ancient weapons they had brought from the dead planet glowed softly on the central table. The process is painful beyond anything we can imagine, Han Sol said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. We have to break our own bones while they are still alive and reshape them into weapons. Dead bone loses its power to harm the Devourers. Dr. Hyejin Seo, the ship's medical officer, studied the readouts from her scanner. The ivory weapons work by channeling what the ancestors called soul fire. It is the life energy that flows through all living things, but each use drains years from the wielder's lifespan. Captain Jamin Yoon looked at the tactical display showing the approaching Devourer ships. How much time do we have? 4 hours until they reach weapons range, replied Navigator Bo-Ram Shin. Their ships are unlike anything in our databases. They seem to absorb energy from everything around them as they move. Lieutenant Yoon-B Park stood up from her chair. If these ivory weapons are our only hope, then we need to start making them now. I volunteer to go first. No, said Han Sol firmly. I should be the first. I have experienced the memories. I understand the process better than anyone. With respect, Doctor, interrupted Security Chief Dong Hyun Kang. You are needed alive to guide the others. Let me be the first to undergo the transformation. Engineer So Young Choi shook her head. We need you both for the battle ahead. I will go first. My knowledge of the ship's systems is important, but not as critical as your expertise. The argument continued for several minutes, until Captain Yoon raised his hand for silence. We all know the risks. We all understand what we are asking of each other. But the choice must be voluntary. No one will be ordered to undergo this transformation. Dr. Seo had been quietly preparing her medical equipment during the discussion. I have analyzed the ancestor physiology from the memory recordings. Their bone structure was different from ours, but the basic principles should be the same. I can perform the extraction surgeries, but I cannot promise they will be painless. Han Sol walked to the table and picked up one of the smaller ivory weapons. It felt warm in his hands and seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. I will go first. I have seen how it is done. Before anyone could protest, he handed the weapon to Dr. Seo. Use this as a guide. My rib bone should work. It is large enough and close to my heart where the life energy is strongest. The medical bay had been converted into a makeshift surgery room. Dr. Seo worked with steady hands as she prepared the anesthetic injections. This will help with the pain, but it cannot eliminate it completely. The bone must remain living during the transformation process. Han Sol lay on the operating table trying to control his breathing. Through the small window, he could see stars and the growing shapes of devourer ships in the distance. In 3 hours, those ships would be close enough to attack. In 3 hours, he would either be a warrior capable of fighting them or he would be dead. "Beginning the procedure now," Dr. Seo announced to the others watching from the observation deck. The first cut was not too bad. Han Sol felt pressure and a dull ache as the surgical tools reached his rib bone. But when Dr. Seo began to extract the bone while keeping it connected to his circulatory system, the pain became overwhelming. He screamed despite his efforts to stay quiet. The pain was like fire running through his entire body. But worse than the physical agony was the sensation of his life energy being drawn out of him. He could feel years of his life flowing into the extracted bone. "It is working," Dr. Seo said with amazement. "The bone is beginning to glow." The extracted rib had become translucent ivory that pulsed with soft light. Dr. Seo carefully shaped it using techniques she had learned from studying the ancestor weapons. When she was finished, Han Sol held a curved blade that seemed to be made of captured starlight. "How do you feel?" asked Lieutenant Park. Han Sol sat up slowly, surprised that he was still alive. He looked at his reflection in the polished surface of a medical instrument. His black hair now had streaks of gray. Lines had appeared around his eyes. The transformation had aged him by at least 10 years. "I feel different," he said, holding up the glowing ivory blade. "I can sense the weapon's connection to my life force. I know how to channel my energy through it." Captain Yoon's voice came through the communication system. "Han Sol, we need to test the weapon immediately. The Devourer scouts are launching smaller attack ships." Han Sol and the others rushed to the weapon testing chamber. Through the reinforced windows, they could see one of the small Devourer attack ships approaching. It was a thing of flowing black metal that seemed to absorb light from the stars around it. "Fire a standard plasma burst at it first," Han Sol instructed the weapons officer. The ship's main gun fired a brilliant beam of energy at the Devourer ship. The attack struck the alien vessel directly, but instead of causing damage, the energy seemed to be absorbed into the black metal. The Devourer ship actually grew slightly larger. "Now let me try," said Han Sol. He moved to the manual targeting system and placed his ivory blade against the weapon's control interface. Immediately, the blade began to glow brighter. Han Sol felt his life energy flowing through the weapon and into the ship's systems. When he fired, the beam that emerged was not plasma or energy. It was pure life force, the essence of organic existence given deadly form. The beam struck the Devourer ship, and the alien vessel began to dissolve like sugar in water. "It works!" shouted Lieutenant Park. "The ivory weapons can destroy them!" But Han Sol had collapsed against the control panel. Using the weapon had drained more of his life force. His hair was now completely gray, and deep lines covered his face. He looked like he had aged another 20 years in the space of a few seconds. Dr. Seo helped him back to the medical bay. "The drain is worse than we expected. Each attack costs decades of life. At this rate, a single person could only use an ivory weapon a few times before dying of old age. Then we need more weapons," said Security Chief Kang, "and more people willing to carry them." Over the next 2 hours, 6 more crew members volunteered for the transformation process. Lieutenant Park was the second to undergo the surgery. Her leg bone became a spear that could channel her life energy into long-range attacks. Pilot Sungmin Oh transformed his arm bone into gauntlets that could overload Devourer systems with a touch. Botanist Mi Young Lim created a staff from her spine that could generate protective barriers of life energy. Communications officer Yoo-Jin Nam made throwing weapons from her finger bones that could seek out enemy weak points. Each transformation aged the volunteer by years and left them forever changed. As the main Devourer fleet approached, the crew of the Taiyang's Dawn prepared for a battle unlike any in human history. They were no longer entirely human themselves. They had become something new, something that could fight the ancient enemy of all organic life. Captain Yoon looked at his transformed crew members. They were older now, marked by sacrifice, but their ivory weapons glowed with determination and hope. "We may be outnumbered," he said, "but we have something the Devourers do not expect. We have the will to sacrifice everything to protect our people." The ivory weapons pulsed brighter in response to his words. Outside the ship, the Devourer fleet moved into attack position. 12 ancient enemies against one small research vessel and its crew of newly made warriors. The battle for humanity's survival was about to begin. The Devourer fleet filled the view screen like a nightmare made real. 12 massive ships of flowing black metal moved through space with predatory grace. Each vessel was the size of a small moon, covered in writhing tentacles and pulsing energy collectors that absorbed light from the surrounding stars. Captain Jaemin Yoon stood on the bridge of the Taiyang's Dawn, his hand resting on the ivory weapon he had created from his own collarbone. The transformation had aged him 15 years in minutes, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. Around him, his crew prepared for the most impossible battle in human history. "All ivory weapons report ready," announced Lieutenant Yunbi Park through the communication system. Her voice sounded older now, weathered by the years the transformation had stolen from her. "We have 8 active weapon bearers and 4 support crew." Dr. Han-Sol Kim sat at the science station, his gray hair making him look like a different person. His ivory blade rested across his knees, glowing with contained life energy. The weapon seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, connected to his very soul. "Enemy ships are powering their harvesting arrays," reported Navigator Boram Shin. She was one of the few crew members who had not undergone the transformation, choosing instead to support the warriors from her position. "They are preparing to drain all organic matter from this system." The lead Devourer ship launched a wave of smaller attack craft. These were not piloted vessels, but extensions of the main ship itself, pieces of living metal that moved with alien intelligence. They swarmed toward the Taiyang's Dawn like angry insects. "Here they come," said Captain Yoon. "All ivory bearers to battle positions." The first attack came from 3 directions at once. Devourer craft fired beams of pure dissolution energy that could break down any matter into its component atoms. The Taiyang's Dawn shook as the attack struck its shields. "Shields down to 60%, called out Engineer So-Young Choi from the engine room. She had transformed her shoulder blade into a set of ivory tools that could channel her life energy directly into the ship's systems. "I am reinforcing them with soul fire, but it is draining me quickly." Lieutenant Park moved to the starboard weapons array. Her ivory spear gleamed as she placed it against the targeting controls. "Engaging the enemy craft on our right flank." The beam that erupted from the ship's weapon was not the usual plasma fire. It was concentrated life energy, the essence of organic existence given deadly form. When it struck the Devourer attack craft, the alien machines began to dissolve like ice in hot water. "Direct hit!" shouted pilot Sungmin Oh from his position at the helm. His ivory gauntlets allowed him to merge his consciousness with the ship's navigation systems, making the Taiyang's Dawn move with impossible grace. The enemy craft are breaking apart, but the victory came at a cost. Lieutenant Park had collapsed at her station, her face showing the lines and gray hair of rapid aging. Using the ivory weapon had drained another decade from her life. Dr. Hyejin Seo rushed to help her. "The life force drain is accelerating. Each use of the weapons costs more than the last. We cannot keep this up for long." More Devourer craft swarmed around them. Security Chief Dong Hyun Kang engaged targets from the port side, his ivory sword channeling destruction through the ship's secondary weapons. Communications Officer Yoo Jin Nam used her throwing weapons to target the smaller attack craft that got too close to the ship's hull. Each successful attack aged the weapon bearer. Each use of soul fire stole years that could never be recovered. But the Ivory weapons were working. The Devourer craft that had seemed invincible were falling before the concentrated life energy of the human warriors. "The main fleet is moving closer," warned Navigator Shin. "The largest ship is preparing to fire its primary harvesting beam." Captain Yoon looked at the massive Devourer vessel approaching them. It was easily 1,000 times larger than their small research ship. Its harvesting beam could drain the life from an entire planet in minutes. "All power to engines," he ordered. "We need to get closer to that ship." "Sir," protested Pilot O, "that is suicide. Their harvesting beam will kill us all." "Not if we strike first," said Captain Yoon, raising his ivory weapon. "I'm going to channel everything I have left into one massive attack. It will either destroy their main ship or kill me in the attempt." Dr. Kim stood up from his station. "Captain, you cannot do this alone. We all knew the risks when we chose this path." One by one, the Ivory weapon bearers gathered on the bridge. Lieutenant Park, despite her exhaustion and rapid aging, took her position. Security Chief Kang stood ready with his glowing sword. The others formed a circle around Captain Yoon, their weapons raised. "We link our soul fire together," said botanist Mi Young Lim, her ivory staff crackling with energy. "All of our life force channeled through a single attack. It is what the ancestors did in their final battle." "It will kill us all," warned Dr. Seo. "Maybe," replied Captain Yoon. "But if we succeed, we save billions of lives throughout the galaxy. If we fail, humanity dies anyway when the Devourers reach Earth." The largest Devourer ship fired its harvesting beam. The attack was a column of pure emptiness, a void that consumed everything it touched. Stars went dark as the beam passed them. Space itself seemed to bend and twist under its power. But the crew of the Taeyang's Dawn was already acting. 8 ivory weapons touched together in the center of the bridge, their glow becoming so bright it was painful to look at directly. The life energy of 8 human beings began to flow together, combining into something greater than the sum of its parts. Captain Yoon felt the other's life force joining with his own. He experienced Lieutenant Park's fierce determination, Security Chief Kang's protective instincts, Dr. Kim's scientific curiosity, and the unique soul fire of each crew member. They were no longer separate individuals, but a single weapon of living light. "Fire!" whispered Captain Yoon. The combined attack erupted from their joined weapons like a star being born. It was not just energy, but the concentrated essence of human courage, sacrifice, and hope. The beam struck the massive Devourer ship just as its harvesting array reached full power. For a moment, the two forces struggled against each other, destruction and creation, emptiness and life, locked in eternal combat. Then the Devourer ship began to crack. Light poured through the fractures in its black metal hull. The harvesting beam flickered and died. The smaller attack craft suddenly stopped moving as their connection to the main ship was severed. With a sound like breaking glass, the massive Devourer vessel shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The explosion was so bright it lit up the entire star system. The other 11 ships of the fleet began to retreat, their confidence shaken by the destruction of their flagship. On the bridge of the Taeyang's Dawn, the 8 ivory bearers collapsed to the deck. The combined attack had drained most of their remaining life force. Captain Yoon's black hair had turned completely white. Deep lines covered his face like a map of suffering and sacrifice. "Did we win?" whispered Lieutenant Park, her voice barely audible. Navigator Shin checked her displays with shaking hands. "The Devourer fleet is retreating. They are jumping to hyperspace. They are leaving the system." Dr. Seo moved among the fallen warriors, checking their vital signs. "You are all alive, but barely. The life drain was more severe than we calculated. Each of you has aged 40 to 50 years. Captain Yoon slowly sat up, his body moving like that of an old man. How long do we have before they return with reinforcements? Unknown, replied Dr. Kim, his voice now raspy with age. But they will return. The Devourers do not give up easily. Then we need to warn the galaxy, said Captain Yoon. Every world, every species, every civilization needs to know what is coming, and they need to know how to fight back. Lieutenant Park struggled to her feet, leaning heavily on her ivory spear. We have proven that the weapons work. We have shown that humans can stand against the Devourers. But at what cost? Whispered Engineer Choi through the communication system. We sacrificed decades of our lives for one battle. How many more battles can we fight? Captain Yoon looked at his aged reflection in the darkened view screen. They had won this battle, but the war was just beginning. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Devourers were regrouping and planning their return. Humanity had learned to fight the ancient enemy, but the price of victory might be higher than anyone could imagine. 3 months after the first battle, the Taeyang's Dawn limped into Earth's orbital space dock. The small research vessel looked like it had been through a war, which was exactly what had happened. Scorch marks covered its hull, and emergency repairs were visible on every surface. Dr. Han Sol Kim stood at the viewing window of the medical bay, watching Earth grow larger as they approached. His reflection showed an old man with white hair and deep lines around his eyes. The Ivory transformation had aged him 50 years in a matter of months, but his eyes still burned with determination. The message drones we sent ahead did their job, said Captain Jaemin Yoon as he entered the medical bay. He moved slowly now, like a man twice his actual age, but his voice carried the authority of someone who had faced the impossible and won. Every government in the galaxy is demanding to know how we defeated the Devourers. Lieutenant Yoonbi Park looked up from where she sat reading reports on her datapad. Her once young face was now marked by the years the Ivory weapons had stolen from her. 300 volunteer warriors from 50 different worlds are already on their way here. They want to learn the Ivory transformation process. Dr. Hee-jin Seo finished checking the vital signs of the newest Ivory bearer, a young engineer named Chang Wook Baek, who had volunteered for transformation just last week. His life signs are stable, but the aging process is accelerating. We are losing people faster than we can train them. The past 3 months had been a desperate race against time. Word of their victory had spread throughout the galaxy, bringing hope to billions of people who had never heard of the Devourers. But it had also brought the harsh reality of what the Ivory weapons demanded from their users. Captain Yoon walked to the table where the original ancestor tablets still glowed with their mysterious light. Have you found anything new in the translations, Minho? Chief linguist Minho Lee looked up from his workstation. He was one of the few crew members who had not undergone the Ivory transformation, choosing instead to focus on unlocking the remaining secrets of the ancestor writings. I found something important yesterday. The deepest layer of the tablets contains information about something called the Great Network. What kind of network? Asked Dr. Kim. Minho pulled up his latest translation on the main display. According to this, the ancestors did not just create individual weapons. In their final years, they built a galaxy-wide network of Ivory constructs that could share life energy across vast distances. Lieutenant Park sat up straighter in her chair. You mean the weapons could be connected to each other? More than that, Minho replied excitedly. The network allowed ancestor warriors on different worlds to combine their soul fire into coordinated attacks. A warrior on one planet could channel the life energy of warriors on 100 other worlds. Engineer So-young Choi's voice came through the communication system from the engine room. That would solve our biggest problem. Instead of each warrior burning through their own lifespan, they could draw from a shared pool of volunteers. Dr. Seo frowned as she considered the implications. But it would also mean that using the weapons would drain life force from people across the galaxy. We would be asking entire populations to sacrifice years of their lives. People are already volunteering, said Captain Yoon quietly. The message drones brought back thousands of responses from worlds throughout the galaxy. Military personnel, scientists, farmers, teachers, people from every walk of life want to contribute to the Ivory network. The ship docked at the orbital station with a soft thud. Within hours, the crew found themselves in meeting rooms filled with government officials, military commanders, and scientists from dozens of worlds. Everyone wanted to know how to build Ivory weapons and how to fight the Devourers. But the most important meeting took place in a secure chamber deep within the station. Admiral Keiko Tanaka of the Galactic Defense Force sat across from Captain Yoon and his crew. Her face was grim as she reviewed the battle reports. "You destroyed one Devourer ship and forced 11 others to retreat," she said. "But our long-range sensors show that massive fleets are gathering at the edge of the galaxy. Hundreds of ships, maybe thousands. They are preparing for a full-scale invasion." Dr. Kim leaned forward in his chair. "The ancestor tablets mention this. They call it the final harvest. When the Devourers encounter resistance, they return with overwhelming force to eliminate any threat to their cycle." "How long do we have?" asked Admiral Tanaka. 6 months, replied Navigator Boram Shin, who had been analyzing the sensor data. "Maybe less if they decide to attack sooner." Admiral Tanaka stood up and walked to the star map displayed on the wall. Red markers showed the locations of known Devourer fleets. There were far too many of them. "We need to build this Ivory network immediately. Every inhabited world needs to contribute warriors to the defense." Over the following weeks, the crew of the Taeyang's Dawn became teachers and leaders of humanity's greatest mobilization effort. Dr. Kim traveled to military academies throughout the galaxy, showing volunteers how to transform their bones into ivory weapons. Lieutenant Park established training centers where new warriors learned to channel their life energy into attacks. Captain Yoon worked with engineers to build the network nodes that would connect ivory weapons across vast distances. The technology was based on ancestor designs, but human innovation made it more efficient and less costly in terms of life energy. The transformation of the galaxy was remarkable to witness. On Earth, entire city blocks were converted into ivory weapon forges where volunteers underwent the painful transformation process. On Mars, the underground colonies became training centers where new warriors learned ancient fighting techniques. On the outer worlds, mining platforms were converted into network relay stations. But perhaps the most amazing change was in the people themselves. The threat of the Devourers had united the galaxy in a way that nothing else ever had. Humans worked alongside aliens from hundreds of different species. Old enemies became allies. Ancient prejudices were forgotten in the face of extinction. Dr. Seo had perfected the transformation process to the point where the aging effect was reduced, but not eliminated. "Each ivory weapon still costs the bearer about 10 years of life," she explained to a group of new volunteers. "But the network connection means you will not have to use your weapon as often." The first major test of the network came when a small Devourer scout force attacked a mining colony in the Outer Rim. Instead of facing the enemy alone, the colony's 12 ivory warriors were able to draw life energy from thousands of volunteers across the network. The battle was over in minutes. The Devourer ships were completely destroyed without any of the local warriors aging more than a few months. The network had worked perfectly. But Lieutenant Park, who had been monitoring the battle from the command center on Earth, noticed something troubling in the data. The energy drain was distributed across the entire network, but it was still significant. "If we have to fight hundreds of Devourer ships at once, we will need millions of people feeding energy into the system. Then we will ask for millions of volunteers," said Captain Yoon firmly. "Every person in the galaxy has a choice to make. They can give a few years of their life to power the network, or they can lose everything when the Devourers arrive." The response was overwhelming. Across 1,000 worlds, people lined up to volunteer for the network. Some contributed just a few months of their lifespan. Others, particularly the elderly and those with terminal illnesses, gave years or even decades. the Ivory network became a symbol of galactic unity and sacrifice. As the final month before the Devourer invasion began, Admiral Tanaka stood before the Galactic Defense Council to deliver her report. We have 40,000 active Ivory warriors spread across 800 worlds. The network connects them all and is powered by over 50 million volunteers. We are as ready as we can possibly be. Captain Yoon, now looking like a man in his 80s despite being only 40 years old, stood beside her. The ancestors fought the Devourers for 300 years before finding a way to break their cycle. We have had less than 6 months to prepare, but we have something the ancestors never had. "What is that?" asked one of the council members. "Unity," replied Captain Yoon. "The ancestors fought alone on their single world. We have the combined will and sacrifice of an entire galaxy behind us." The ivory weapons throughout the network pulsed with light as if responding to his words. In hidden bases and secret facilities, warriors prepared for the battle that would determine the fate of all organic life in the galaxy. High above Earth, the original ancestor tablets glowed brighter than ever before. The ancient warnings had been heeded, the weapons had been forged, the network had been built. Now all that remained was to discover whether courage, sacrifice, and the united will of billions of people would be enough to break a cycle of destruction that had lasted for millions of years. The final harvest was coming, but this time the galaxy would be ready.